Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to the Facebook Live. I see a few people on already, so let us know where you're joining us from. Tell us the location you're joining us from, and then we're going to get started shortly. So, a few housekeeping announcement. Um, Please, let's try to make this conversational. We ask that you ask questions, you make comments. If you can also share this post, that would be fantastic. If you can also invite your friends, that would be highly appreciated. So today we're going to be talking about how to tell your story to the media. Another way to look at it is how to tell your story on national or international television. We don't have the greatest internet today, so the video might be a little bit static. We just ask that you hang tight. It might be for a few seconds. It's still going to go through. Um, and just keep that in mind. So as I said, today is going to be about how to tell your story to the TV media, particularly. So for those who do not know, my name is Benga Gunjimi. I am the author of the book Borderless Voice: The Power of Telling Your Story and Defining Your Identity. Uh, I wrote this book with the conviction or with the premise that everyone has a story to tell. And our collective and individual stories are very powerful, that they can help level every border, every wall or obstacle we may come across. Whether that border be financial, whether they be cultural, whether they be industry specific, whether they be trying to get into a new market or trying to expand our mission around the world, our story can be a great catalyst for that to happen. At this particular time, we're so blessed that we live at this important time that we now have unrestricted access to technology to get our voice, our media, to the media. We have the power of virality of our story. We have the power to take control of our narrative. We have the power to even monetize our story using the services or the resources of the media. So what I thought we did today was to look at how we can go about storytelling, both from a strategic as well as a technical standpoint. So I've invited our guest tonight that I'm going to be reading a bio very shortly, to give us insight and share expertise with us, pretty much how to go about this process of pitching our story to the media, to the global media. And I'm going to be complementing that conversation, both from a strategic standpoint, that how do you take control of your own narrative and give yourself permission to tell your story. That said, I'm going to go ahead and read out the bio of our guest. So our amazing guest tonight is Heidi Adams Fitzpatrick. She's a multimedia journalist with more than 20 years of experience in global media. She grew up in the township of Cape Town in South Africa and Windhoek in Namibia. Heidi honed her broadcasting skills in the Southern African media market as a primetime radio and television news anchor. In 2009, she moved into international news as a foreign correspondent for European Global 24 Hours News Network, France 24, covering Southern Africa. She later became France 24's U.S. West Coast correspondent based in Los Angeles, California, where she covered breaking news and events including Michael Jackson's death trial, Mitt Romney's presidential beat, Whitney Houston's death, and the Academy Awards. Currently, Heidi is a host and a producer for Voice of America. So, Heidi, welcome so much to the broadcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Benga. This is an exciting opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, you're awesome. The pleasure, the honor is ours. Thank you for being a part of this community. So you come to this conversation into the media space with such a breadth of experience and a global experience. But right now, you're in the Washington, D.C. area. Can you tell us more about your work in the United States media space and what might be your day to day or the exciting projects or news or stories that you're working on?
Benga, thank you. I'm just listening to the bio that I sent you, and it might sound like really I'm an entertainment reporter, and I'm actually not. I should have included a little more about that. Actually, my work has been very heavy on political news and stories. But here in Washington, I actually have a very cool gig. I get to cover the continent that I am from the United States. So it's so nice to be still have that contact with the African continent. And I'm learning so much about Africa here in the United States because the world is interconnected. So really, at the Voice of America, I'm really getting that opportunity. I'm also a co-host on a talk show right now that's targeting more of a women's audience. It's called Our Voices. But in general, at the Voice of America, I work as a producer, a reporter, and a host. And we really cover the issues at the intersection of Africa and the United States. And I don't want to speak about Africa as though it is just this one place, but we do get to cover issues across Africa, the things that the different countries have in common, the differences between the various countries, and how these African countries interact with the United States or with the West. We also cover global issues as well. But of course, Washington is so strategically important in the world, and especially at the time right now when we are looking to see how is the United States engaging with Africa and with countries across Africa, I should say. So it's interesting. It's never a dull moment when you cover the African continent. There's always something happening. But what's most exciting are also what people are doing in the diaspora. Really when people have access to education, when they have access to job opportunities, it's so exciting to see what Africans accomplish here. And it's exciting to see what immigrants accomplish. I'm an immigrant too. So it just shows when people have access and people are included in a society, the world is their oyster.
Nice. Great, great. So you coming in with a breadth of experience and you using TV to pretty much change the African narrative, the African story. This particular television tool, the media, is such that it can be accessible to everyone, but it's very somewhat, um, I would say it's a space that a lot of people do not understand how it works. So, what the alternative for a lot of people is we settle for social media. And so we might even go as far as saying traditional media is dead. So, is that true? Can I still use the power of television to get my message, my story to the world, or social media is just the way to go, or there's a combination of both of them at some point? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, of course, it's kind of my job to defend traditional media because traditional media is my job. But, just as I say, the world is very interconnected. So are the different forms of media today. I would say traditional media isn't dead, actually far from it. But I think it's alive, but that it's evolved. And over decades and centuries, traditional media has had to evolve and change with the times and change with technology. So I think the landscape has shifted, and traditional media has had to learn to compete with other forms of media and to coexist and really find how do we exist in this new environment. And I think from time to time that is what we expect, that from time to time that happens. Some media houses will shut down. New media houses will fact that we are just the mere fact that we're having this conversation and that there is the question around it's an important question, but I think the answer is it is still very much alive. Social media, as great as it is, does require of one to do your own sort of curation and your own sort of sifting through the news and what is news, what isn't, what is true, what, especially in this era of where you have fake news, you don't know the content. Is it real? Is it not? Is it good? Is it not? So social media certainly gives you quantity, but I think people still look to traditional media. When you turn on your television or your radio or a podcast, which we kind of now see as the new radio, but when people they might consume it differently, but I think people still turn to television news and radio news and that traditional form of news to find out what's real, what's accurate, and they know and what's reliable, and that is what is of high quality, because our job is to find the best stories and present you with that. You don't have to go and do all the sifting through. You don't have to wonder, is this real? Or you don't have to oh, this isn't so good. Does it inform? It's our job to bring you the highest quality of information, the most accurate information, so that you can sit back and relax and be informed and entertained. And whatever those needs of yours are, it's our job to provide that to you. And so we kind of are still, we have this important role of being the gatekeepers of the truth of what is real and what is not. It's a very high responsibility. Sometimes there are those who fail, and sometimes we have to correct. Yes, that's always going to be there, but it is our job to every day come in and strive to think of our audience, because someone creating content on social media isn't necessarily thinking what's going to be consumed. They might be thinking about how they come across or how many followers I'm getting. There's a whole different set of intentions there. But true, real journalists, our intention is to bring you the news. That's why we go to work, so that we can bring you the best information, the most timely information, the most accurate information possible. So I think we still, that's a service that we perform. And I think there is very much still a space for that.
Awesome. So my line of work as a story coach and someone who works in the business of storytelling, the very typical reaction from my community is when I say something like, everyone has a story to tell, and we all have the responsibility to tell our story, the typical reaction I get is, my story is not all that excited. There's nothing exciting about my own story. And so what would you say to someone who would say that I am not Oprah, I'm not President Obama or Elon Musk, and I've not done anything of a remarkable global importance or significance. My story is the last thing any TV station is interested in. Is that true? And they might even go far and say that TV could be discriminatory to people like me because my story is not what they're looking for. Can you help correct or just speak to that paradigm people might have with their stories?
I think the answer to that is, if someone feels that way, they could be right that maybe their story isn't interesting, if it really isn't interesting. And they could be wrong about it too, because, I say just make sure that no matter who you are, that your story is audience worthy, that it is worthy of someone, that someone would want to hear it. Many of the stories that famous people have, Barack Obama's story, as you mentioned, or Oprah's story, as you mentioned, there's a trajectory there. What's fascinating about them is that they've had a journey. They have had things that they've had to overcome in order to get to where they are. There were people who along the way have told them, no, you can't, no, you shouldn't, and no, you will not, because of your skin color, because of your disability, because of various factors or various other barriers that people have created to stop them from accomplishing something. It's the story of overcoming those things, I think, that is probably the most precious. If you can find a struggle and then what you have overcome, and you can tell that story articulately, because as important as the story is, these are two most important parts, that the story is one that is compelling, that people would want to hear, and that it is an interesting story, and that you are able to articulately tell that story. Those are two very important elements. And of course, we'll talk about this probably a little later, the ability to pitch that story, that compelling story. But I think a lot of people think these people are there because they're famous and that everybody's listening to them because they're famous. You can be, if you have had a struggle in your life, or many times that people have told you no, you shouldn't, or you can't, and you overcome all that and you go on to be either extremely successful, or you go on to find a niche where you are now helping others who have the same, and you are now in a position where you can help others and you're making an impact. That story, in my view, will always sell, because everybody likes the story, either a rags to riches story or a story of someone who has overcome something, and we can see the trajectory of that story. Wow, who would have thunk that that person would be this today? And look, not just that she's now something, he's now something, but look at what they're doing to make an impact with what they have. How a have-not has become a have, and how they're going on to help others who are in that position, or how they're paying it forward. I think we look at the stories that will tug at the heartstrings of our audience, that will not just speak to the head, but will speak to the heart as well. So you've got to make those two, I would say those two cases. For us, it is not just whose story it is, but we look at the content of that. I'm someone, I made a decision a while ago that I'm going to stop chasing famous people for their stories. I made a personal decision as a reporter. I'm going to seek out the people who are the everyday heroes. And if you're an everyday hero, who can resist a story like that? An everyday hero, I, for one, want to see that story. And I'm sure our audience wants to, because that's what people can relate to. People see Oprah like, oh, look at what I have to do. I mean, first of all, I have to be rich. I have to have that kind of access. Not everybody has that. There are parts of Oprah's story that we can relate to. And then there are going to be parts that we probably can't. But if it's an everyday hero, it's not just someone we admire, it's someone we want to be like. So think of those things sometimes. And if you can sell that to us, I think it's a winner every time.
Wow. Thank you so much. I think this is a very wonderful perspective. And what I would add to that is, and before we ask that you walk us through the process of pitching that story, what I'm going to contribute to that is that the very first person you need to sell that story to is yourself. Because in my work of coaching with stories, vast majority of people don't think so much about their stories. Like, my story is the last thing people want to talk about. I think you would have to believe that first. And when I talk about this idea of defining your identity, is you would have to go, find a better word, pretty much you would have to like overcome your perception of your own story. So one of the things I recommend for everyone is to take inventory. And I like what you said, the overcoming story. So just go through it. How many things have to overcome within my lifetime? You and I cater to a community that might be classified as immigrant or minority or diaspora. We all have coming to American story, and it's a very simple one that we can all start with. In that community, and everyone have their own story in that community. It's while they come to this country, they have to go through adjustment. They have to go through honing their cultural competency skill. They have to make a case that they can do what they've trained all their life to do. They have to compete with people of all nationality, which is a very different territory for them. So those are stages of them overcoming certain things. And I think the responsibility is on us all to take inventory of every time we have to overcome something. We just might be positively surprised with how much we have accomplished and how audience worthy this story is. So now that someone has said, okay, now I'm getting it, Heidi, like, okay, I see it. I think I've overcome a few things. I think my story is relatable to the vast majority of the people. What is the next steps of getting my story on the TV, on the television? How do I pitch that story to you or to the media, to the TV?
Okay, so now this is where And first of all, I want to apologize, and I'm drinking so much water. I'm recovering from a cold, so my throat is a little, a little hoarse. But so I'm just be drinking water from time to time. But I would say I'm going to say a few things that do not take it the wrong way. Take it in the most constructive way possible, because at the end of the day, I think it will be good for both the producer and the person trying to pitch the story to know and understand a few things. You might have a great story, personal story to tell, but think and consider whether television is the best platform to tell that story. Because there are a variety of platforms to tell your story. Maybe your story is something that is best told on social media, where you have an audience that is more receptive of the message. Maybe your story is one that's best told in an auditorium in front of people or at a convention, that kind of setting. Maybe your story is best to be told in a podcast. Maybe your story. So just because you have a good story doesn't necessarily mean that television is the most effective way to tell your story. And it doesn't guarantee that that's going to necessarily be the biggest audience and the audience where you might make the greatest impact. So always, be very self-aware in that sense, I would say. There's nothing wrong with pitching. And if you see your pitch doesn't have any traction, don't be discouraged by that, because sometimes in the news world, we go day by day. Today, if there is some major horrific bus crash or a massive bombing, it's not because we think your story is bad or we don't like it. It's just that day is crazy. And that day we're dedicating the whole show to the anniversary of something. So there are so many moving parts on our end. But I would advise people, think about maybe your story is best told in a blog post or in print, where you can expand more on it. So don't always just think television is the be all and end all of media. I have seen where great stories can bomb on television just because that just wasn't the right platform for it. And that person didn't expect that they're only going to get 3 minutes to talk about their life story, because it takes some doing to be able to tell your life story in 3 minutes with someone asking you questions in that time. So that's where television, I think, sometimes can become very disappointing to guests or people who come onto the show. They think because the show is 30 minutes long that they're going to get 30 minutes, and what will always take precedent is the news of the day. So that's first thing to bear in mind. But I think when you are pitching, there is one thing that is very important to us, and we would like people who pitch to us to be aware of this, that for us, we think about the audience first. If you're telling a personal story and it's a compelling story, why would the public care? Why would the viewer want or need to hear it? Because that's how we look at story ideas. How does it serve our audience? Not necessarily how it serves you. So that's the first thing we care about. Who should our audience listen to instead of the 10,000 other people who may have published a book, who may have released a report, or who may have started a business? So for us, that's very important. If you are, just as an example, Benga, you came onto a show of ours a while back. You spoke about identity, and what clicked for me at that point was it was about timing as well, because at that point there was this huge conversation about immigrants making it in America, and there was a huge conversation about people and identity, and also that is a recurring issue that we call, it's a current affair that's always something relevant in the news, because we can take the news of the day or an issue of our time and turn it and make a pivot and say, in this time where there's lots of for instance, xenophobia, but for example, a lot of people might be questioning their identity. So for us to be making that connection, if you can help us do that, then your chances of getting on the show are much greater. So also make sure that issue is timely. I think also if you are talking about an issue, when it comes to television, it's a visual medium. So if you're going to refer to your childhood, send us pictures of you as a child. Or if you're referring to your childhood in Timbuktu, send us pictures so that you can take viewers there. Now, you're not always going to have the visuals, but if you are talking about an issue, we think two ways. Okay, this is a personal story, so does that person have visuals of that? Or they're talking about the work they do. Do they have images of them doing the work that they do? This is an issue that, or lived experience. Do we have any images? Might they have image? If you're going to be talking about your work in relieving hunger, for example, okay, we might have some generic footage, but if you have something that can help bolster your argument that is visually interesting, because else your interview becomes a talking head interview. The anchor talks, you talk, and yeah, you can be very interesting. Yes, and the segment is about 5 minutes. We'd like to push in some visuals there to just give people something else to look at and to help sort of make your argument more interesting. I think also giving us, it's not interesting to the audience to just hear someone talk about stuff. But if people want to hear and see things firsthand. So if you're coming to speak as an expert, that sometimes makes us roll our eyes unless you can include a personal story that makes us feel like you have had a lived experience yourself, that you have had a first-hand experience, and that is what motivated you to do something. So there's got to be some connection between you and the issue, because else it's just an expert coming to talk about stuff. But if you can speak as an expert who has experienced something, people like the lived experience. That's what makes you relatable. And unfortunately, no matter how good looking you are, we will need the visuals to show that, because we get some good looking people, but they can be boring. But so if you need to be compelling. That's what makes people watch. That's what keeps people watching. So we deliver the audience, but there's also responsibility on you to help us keep that audience for that, to help us keep them watching. So I would say, in as far as possible, offer producers things that will make their lives easier. And you should be able to tell your story, make your pitch in 4 lines. Because if you make it long, it gives us the impression that you're not going to understand that the segment is maybe 5 minutes long and you only have 5 minutes to make your story. It's too long. We read all day long. We have to read stuff constantly. Don't give us more things to read. Bullet points. Hi, this is who I am. This is what I'm pitching this story to. This is why your audience might want to watch this. And this is what I want to talk about. Contact details and offer to follow up. I think via email, doing that is the best way to contact us and to pitch to us.
Wow. And this, so Heidi, one of the things I'm hearing you talk about is this responsibility for us to have a paradigm with our story. So it's almost as if you have to live your life as almost as if it's already on TV before you start pitching it to go into the television. So you talk about that there are several platforms that you can start with your story, whether it is podcast or blog or social media. Would it make a difference if I want to approach you, say the Black History Month is coming up, and I know that's going to happen, it's on the calendar. Now, right now, I'm now making compilation of the work that I do. I am intentionally leveraging social media and podcast and blog posts, things that are within my control. Would that make a difference in pitching, in making a stronger case for me to get on TV, or is just going by the merit of my story in itself?
You raise a very important point. And for me personally, I like it when people send me links. Don't send me links to your resume, but send me links to other work that you've done. Because it gives me the impression, first of all, it helps me see whether you would be good to listen to, interesting to listen to on television. I would like to see what are the issues that you are involved in. I'd like to see other examples of your work, because being on TV, it takes guts. We're trained to be on TV, but someone coming in as a guest is not trained to be on television. It takes guts, and yeah, you know, I'm not saying everybody has to be this great flamboyant person, but you've got to be able to be articulate and tell that story at least. But before you even get there, I want to see that you've done things, and I want to see in which who you are speaking to. That's why I'm thinking, yeah, things like blog posts and things are great ways for me. I like to see, oh wow, this person also writes on this and they write on that. I keep in the back of my head, next time I need an expert on something later on in the year, remind me I need to bring this person back. So show the breadth of your work, but with direct links. I speak on this. Just to make an example, someone sent me a pitch once. They were trying to pitch as an expert on China and Africa, for example. Now, of course, we are always looking for new, fresh faces. Especially, I'm always looking for someone new because else we end up using the same people. What this person did was they gave us they said, hi, this is who I am. This is what I used to do. I used to work in the Obama White House, or I used to do this X, Y, Z. And they said, I know that this is in the news right now. I can speak on this issue. I can speak on the relationship between China, Africa, and the United States. Next, I can also speak on this issue. And in every point, he gave us a link to what he had written in a blog post. But he pitched several issues to me as an expert, not as his personal story, but as an expert. So much so that I had to stop myself from wanting to invite the person on every single time because I'd be going to the same person for everything. But that person made my life so much easier because they were succinct in what they do. This is what, he was basically saying to me, you need someone to talk about hunger in the DRC. This is what I can. And he was giving me story ideas in that pitch. I can talk about this and why this is happening and why I can talk. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So if I'm going to go and pitch for the day, if I don't have a story for the day, I can go back to this email because it was an unforgettable email and it was simple. It wasn't flashy. It was just simple, but he stuck to the point and he could point me to other things that he had done so that I could see. So first place I go to is LinkedIn. Before I even I go to LinkedIn because I want to see what this person has done, and just the layout gives me everything I need to know. I can see the person's picture. So with things like that, if you have a photograph, send it to us. It might sound very superficial, but it actually literally puts a face to your work. And we work in a visual medium. We want to see you. And not to sound too weird, but if you're going to come and speak about race issues to us, if you don't want to speak about the Black experience in America, I'm kind of hoping that you're going to be someone who has had the Black experience in America and that you're not some person from India who's talking, you know what I mean? So we want authenticity as well. So that helps us. And again, I apologize if it sounds superficial, but it is important also for us to put a face to the work, and that helps us remember that person. I remember because I've seen the face. So I'm not saying it always has to be a picture of yourself, but it helps. So yes, I agree with you. If you can point us to other work, those other things you've done, those presentations that you may have done, that's great. And have those images ready as well. What you did, Benga, you had a picture of your book. That's so important. It sounds like a small thing, but if we're going to talk about a book, we want to point to it. We want to be able to show it. So, and you had that photo ready. So those are all small but important things. Just show that you are ready to be on television.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. We last week we had this conversation about telling your story for pretty much like telling your story for like job opportunities. And we spoke a great deal about the power of LinkedIn. One of the things we said is think about LinkedIn as the boardroom and think about Facebook as the playground.
That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yes. And I make examples of how a lot of times as a recruiter, when I'm recruiting, I go to LinkedIn And even way before you have the opportunity to tell me your story, I'm already making decisions of your persona and your brand identity on LinkedIn. As a matter of fact, I may even be the one to initiate opportunities to you based on the showcase of your thought leadership that you've been able to do. And when it comes to this idea of thought leadership, I think oftentimes it sounds so simple and it's critical, as you said, little things like taking inventory. One of the things I say is tracking the peak moments of your career. You don't have to wait to that to be requested. You can create a portfolio of all that you've done. LinkedIn allows you to publish articles. You don't have to be on Forbes or Huffington Post any longer. You can use LinkedIn to get your work out there. You can put videos. You can do all kinds of things, leveraging social media and speaking to your thought leadership. As a matter of fact, it might even reverse the direction whereby it is a TV pitching to bring you on because you've been able to tell your story so powerful that at this point it speaks for itself. I remember the first time I had the opportunity to come to your network was we haven't even met. It was a mutual connection who in my community have seen my work, and it coincided with when you were talking about Africa and all the things that was going on. But just because I've been able to tell my story, leveraging the tools within my disposal, blogs, social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, podcast, Facebook Live, those things help to strengthen your brand authority and identity. So Heidi, how do we, because the aspiration of all professionals is, I want to be the go-to person when your media is scouting stories. I want to be the person that you have on. How do I get to that coveted status whereby, is the authority when it comes to storytelling or Africa or women issues? How do I get to that without necessarily being in your face and say, hey, interview me, bring me on, but to the point that I'm now in your radar? How does that happen?
I'm actually going to use you as a very good example of that. And it's so important what you said about being on the radar. There's nothing wrong with making contact from time to time with a journalist. But for instance, there was someone else I was very, they went out of their way to sort of establish a relationship, which is great. I always appreciate making this relationship with people. But the person was pitching me every week. And I cannot cover something from the same organization or the same person every week. But how you and I met, we did the story, and now you're on my radar that I'm pitching sometimes you, hey, do you need an expert on this? I know this guy. So that works. But what you were saying on LinkedIn and publishing there, as a producer looking for stories, that's where I go to look. My LinkedIn newsfeed. More often than not, I'm like, because I'm not just looking for what I need today. I'm planning ahead. I'm thinking, let me remember this article when I'm going to talk about food insecurity, because I know the areas that I cover. Let me talk about this when we're going to do something around Women's Day, for example, or we're going to do something around health. This person is an expert. And the way you become that is by being published, by writing, being seen as a thought leader in the conversation. When I worked in international development for a couple of years, I kind of tried to really encourage people to position the organization as a thought leader in very specific areas. You don't want to be all over the place either, but know what your issues are, whether it's a personal story you're telling or you want to come across as an expert or a thought leader. Publish. And when you do get on air, when you do publish, at every moment like that, put that on LinkedIn as well so that we can see you on other networks. We can see, and that's how you become coveted. Oh, that person was just on Al Jazeera, or that person was just on CNN, or we want that too. But you don't have to be on Al Jazeera and CNN, as a starting point. Write something of your own. If your ideas are good, or you have contributed to your opinion or your expertise to a conversation that is universal, a conversation that is an issue of our time. That's how you get noticed. That is how I notice. I go through my LinkedIn feed. Oh, I like this topic. I will look for who are the people commenting in this, who are the people lending their expertise. If you are writing a blog post about a particular issue, it's all about relevance too. And wow, I really like what they're saying. I want to bring that on. Right now, for example, I'm looking very much for people with amazing immigrant stories, because we always talk about changing the narrative about people from Africa. I'm an immigrant from Africa. So it's something that I relate to personally. And I want in my work to tell the stories of the accomplishments of people who come here, and the struggle that they overcome, and how they go on to succeed. And I still remember a quote you said in a time, like, you said, we can't afford to come here and play small. Those are memorable lines. Those are memorable ideas. Those are things that people can relate to. It is a state of mind that people can relate to or aspire to. So if you're inspirational, if you're contributing something, I think then you become that coveted person. And when you are published somewhere else, show us. There's nothing wrong with bragging a little bit. So show us. We always want to see that.
Wow. We do have a question. I think we already spoke to this from Louisa. And by the way, thank you, Louisa, for joining us. She said, if you are an expert, or if an expert is interested in speaking or contributing to an occurrence that just showed up in the media, for example, says in the news, do they need to have a personal story? So are you making the decision strictly off the merit of their expertise or how relatable their personal story is?
No, you don't need a personal story. If you're coming at us as an expert in a field, we're very interested in your thoughts and your ideas. And we don't necessarily need to hear your story of struggle. Of course, it's always, if you mention it, there's no rule that says you can't. But if you're coming at something as an academic or as an expert and you have something to say, great. Right now, I would say, especially in certain fields, if you're a woman doing that, and I see, of course, I can see your picture, that helps. But if you're a woman who is an expert in a particular field, we're interested in your thoughts and your ideas, and that's your selling point. That is what you sell, what you are contributing. You don't have to have a personal story for that. If you're coming to sell your book or something like that, we kind of want to hear what's the personal story, so we can weigh up that. But as long as your issue is relevant, it is authentic, and you are compelling in your thoughts and ideas, that's what I would be looking for. So no personal story needed on that, but great question.
So do I also need like a media, like a publicist, a PR agent to help broker that relationship and maintain that relationship, or you're making decisions based on how I've been able to demonstrate my credibility and authority, out there, like the work I show on my LinkedIn and my marketing? Or do I necessarily need to attach the services of a professional to help me make my pitch more solid?
That is not terribly important to us. You'll quickly learn that in the media, we don't like red tape. Sometimes when I have to speak to someone's publicist or someone's spokesperson, and I kind of go, because that is now two people I would have to negotiate with. I would have to schedule with to get someone on. Sometimes some people's publicists, if you know you're not a very organized person and you do need that from your end, great. But from our end, we need you to be responsive and accessible. And we need you to be good. So some people are great, but not accessible. So for us, I think, wait, the last time I tried to get this person, it was such a struggle to get them. I'm not going to go there again. Or I like that person. They're great, but I don't like dealing with their media agent. I don't like dealing with, forget it. We'll move on to someone else. But if you have someone who is sharp, who can, at the end of the day, we want you body in that seat on, we want our show to air and we want that to work out. So whether you have one or not, as long whatever means you have to use to make yourself accessible to us and responsive to us. And we like just dealing straight with people, but not everybody has that kind of personality or time where they want to be fielding a million calls from the media. We also don't want to be making a million calls. If it is one straight line through to you, if there is one middleman, fine, but just that person shouldn't get in the way of us getting you on air. We always have to make arrangements and things around that. But it's your personal choice whether that works better for you or not. For us, we don't care if you use a coach or if you have a spokesperson or a media agent, or as long as we have you on air and it works on our end.
So what about press releases? Do they still work?
We don't really like press releases, but if it's from the United Nations, we expect it's gonna be a press release. There's some places where we expect to get press releases from, and depending on what we cover, yes. But if we're dealing with individuals, I would say send an email with a very relatable human story, or a pitch that feels like we're speaking to a person, not to a huge organization where there's going to be 50,000 hoops we're going to have to jump through to make this happen. I say if it's just you, or if it's a small organization, a press release can be, for me, just an email with all those things that I mentioned earlier. That's, in my view, a press release. I think just it's the way you make contact that is important. I wouldn't go out and kill myself to make something look like an official press release. For us, we don't care. We want a good story. We want to be able to read it in a short amount of time. We want all the elements there. And we want a news peg. I don't know if we'll have a chance to come back to this, but I just want to just give one tip to people. Before you send a press release, know the show you want to be on. Know the network you want to be on. Know the segment you want to be on. Watch it. Time it. Look at the kind of people they're interviewing on that segment on the show. See the nature of the stories and see if you fit in to that. So that will let the producer know that you know what kind of show you want to get on. Sometimes people expect to just be on a news show, and it's just a matter of what they're pitching isn't a fit for the show that the producer's working on necessarily. If it's a magazine show like the one that you came on to, Benga, we have news at the top, but then there's a segment where we will have an interview and we'll move on to things that are of human interest, and that's more magazine style. So you knew that segment existed, but then time that segment also. No, okay, it's 5 minutes long. So I need to be able to tell, these are the points I want to make in 5 minutes. So before you send your press release, work the problem backwards and think, okay, that's what I want to be on. What do I need to get onto that show? So the people who have gotten on, do I have any of those same characteristics? Do I hit any of those points? How will I, how can I be of interest to their audience? Because clearly that's the kind of audience they're targeting. They like personal stories. They like people who've written books. They like people who speak on these topics. If I hit the same box, great. So now I go back and I say, okay, I saw that this was 5 minutes long. Time how long people have to speak. Practice. See if you can do it in the same way. And if you don't know if your story is really compelling, focus group your own story with friends, with colleagues. See if it interests them, and you might get the most honest response from the people around you. A producer's not going to spend time telling you what you did wrong or what didn't work. They're just not going to respond. And that can make you despondent. But maybe it wasn't the right fit. Or maybe there was something you missed and that a friend could tell you. So it's not really just about what your adoring mother thinks you should be doing on television, but TV is not about whether you think you're good, it's about whether others think you're good. That goes not just for our audience, it goes for people like us who are television news anchors too. Sometimes people think that if they think they're good, that's all they need. No, it's whether the audience thinks you're good, and that's tough, but it's not impossible. So come across as a human being, I would say. What do you need to do to come across? We like authenticity. Be real. Be a human being. You don't have to be a static, most important person in the world. Just be a human being that people can relate to. And I think you will be called back over and over again if you're compelling and your story is compelling.
One of the things a few things I'm trying to prepare my community who's have this vision or aspiration to get on television in 2019. From a life coaching standpoint, I'm asking them to try to answer questions like, what do I want to be nationally known for in 2019? Because if I can answer that question myself, there's one thing I want to be nationally known for. I think it's going to make my my pitch so compelling and easier, for the producer to make a decision. Number two is to actually go ahead and list all the TV shows you want to be on and try to know the producer of that show, part of your vision board or your goal setting for 2019. So again, you are trying to increase the probability for success. Those two questions: what do I want to be nationally known for? What specific shows do I want to be on? Who are the producers to these shows? How can I reach them? And I think, again, it comes down to like LinkedIn and leveraging your personal network and how you can get your voice, your message through. So Heidi, now that we have been able to collapse this wall that medias are not reachable, they're discriminatory to stories, now that we have been able to settle all of that, now that I'm on television, what do I do next? Because you can have a lifetime opportunity and not fully maximize it. Do you have any insight in terms of people who they only have one shot and they make so much out of it? Or just for anyone who say, now that I've been on a few shows, I was expecting my phone to ring or emails, nothing happened. But what happens next now that you're on television?
Kind of don't call us, we'll call you, right? Well, I think multimedia. Don't just, as someone who works in television, let me assure you, television is not the be all and end all of everything. In the era where you can self-publish, in the era where you can actually go and find your own audience, embrace that, because sometimes we become part of your audience, on social media, on LinkedIn. So that's why I would say expand your ideas to not just be a one-hit wonder and not just be, a one-trick pony, that you only are an expert on that one particular thing. And, sometimes that's your thing, your one thing, but then temper down your expectation to be on television every week. I think a lot of it for us is about relevance and timing. So I would say explore other forms of media too. Explore podcasting, explore radio. You might actually find the thing that you love. Television can, it can be so, it's such a temporary thing sometimes. Don't let that be your only aim. If you're on television, fantastic, great. It's going to be, you'll have a clip that you'll be able to show forever. But we also want to see that, 1 year later, you're still just, that's the same thing you're trying. No, do the next thing. And as you do that, you'll find that there are other avenues that you can pursue, and those avenues can bring you back on television too. So I would say, think about other forms of media as well, especially in this age where people really do have the choice to do it. I've seen many ways where people, at first I was like, I don't think should I reach out to them to do the story? I can see they're very active on social media. This is the story but then I see them, oh wow, they just came out with a book. Okay, that's interesting. And now I can see how people are reacting to the book. That helps. They recognize that right now the story everybody's talking about is the Me Too movement, and she's telling her story. At this point, she's maybe pushing her book again. She understands that it needs to be a news peg. I need to come talk about women's issues and women's rights and the Me Too movement or Time's Up movement. I'll bring her on. So be very savvy where that's concerned. Television isn't the be-all and end-all. It's great, but you can tell your story on other forms and serve a plethora of audiences by just exploring everything. Not everything's going to work, but you won't know unless you try.
And as we bring this in, I want us to speak about authenticity. There is a saying in your media world that if it, how do you guys say it? If it bleeds, it leads. If it smells, it sells. And people are polarizing. People intentionally are chaotic. And it seems to be sadly a winning strategy in this time and age. And people is there even a need to be authentic anymore? And so what does that leave someone with authenticity? Um, what are your thoughts on that? Authenticity and the typical mantra of you have to be polarizing, it has to have some elements of chaos for it to be actually newsy.
I think that's such an important conversation to have, and that's probably where knowing the kind of show that you want to be on, know where you want to be on. If you see this as something where it's just going to be, verbal battle or verbal combat, you don't want to be part of that. Your story is different. Seek out shows and channels that offer that. Don't try and get into that conversation. It serves nobody. Because I personally, I tune out those things. I'm looking for authentic stories. When it comes to whether it leads or bleeds, again, that's a certain segment of the news. Those are hard news bulletins, hard news shows. We have an element of that in one of our shows where it's not necessarily if it leads and bleeds, but they're going to lead with where the bombing was, or they're going to lead with, where the bleeding happened or where the lives lost. The show then has a segment where we talk about other things. Some shows don't have those segments. They only talk about the politics of the day and the divisiveness of the day. So find the show that suits the message that you want to bring across, and that might have the audience that's receptive to that, because those are very niche audiences who watch the verbal chaos and who watch that. That's a very niche audience. You don't need to kill yourself trying to fit into that. I think don't just try to be on the news. Like I said before, learn as much as you can about the show that you're going to be on. I would also say that there's no substitute for a really good story. And if your story is authentic, if it has all those elements, you go find the one that will lend itself to that. And they do exist. There are plenty of them. It's just we are bombarded with the same options every day, but there are other options. So I would say expand your horizons by looking what is out there. And in this day and age, it doesn't just have to be, you can go global. There are many television channels that have shows on the internet. That's, where they cater for specific audiences. And I wish we had more time. I would have told you about an example of someone who had a very personal story and is just being called by all sorts of channels. It happened before my eyes and I was so shocked. But I think it is possible. Just know who you want to talk to, what the audience is, and find those shows that are speaking to that same audience.
Wow. So finally, Heidi, what would you say in terms of if I run into you, say on a train station, and I see you on television, and I'm trying to sell you on my story. I have this 30-second elevator pitch, whether that be metaphorically or figuratively, in person, or I have this email to send, or I have this post. What is one thing that you watch out for to say, in terms of your own filter, your decision making, to say this is a newsworthy story or TV word? What is that one thing that you look out for what can anyone do right now to increase their chances to get your story to a larger platform like TV.
Right, and that's happened quite a few times where I maybe meet someone, yes, in a restaurant, and we talk for a few minutes just because we are in a situation where maybe we can talk. While that person's talking to me, I'm imagining already whether this person, I want to see this person on television, whether I think, and it's happened so many times that someone might send me via an email and the picture's not that great, but then when I speak to them face to face, like, oh wow, this person got my attention in the first 5 minutes. So your elevator pitch is very important to be able to do that, because yeah, okay, sometimes people might come across as they don't want to be disturbed or anything. I personally, I like that human connection because I've already learned so many things about you, and that I know that you can tell your story. I know that I want to listen to you, so my audience might want to listen to you. I think then, you know, if you exchange business cards, that's always fine. If I say call me, email me, great, do that. Follow up. Follow up as soon as you can. If you don't get a response immediately, especially from someone like me, I'm not always, you know, just because I'm busy or I'm traveling or something like that, you can wait a while, but follow up again. There's nothing wrong with following up again. Hey, just wanted to check. Sometimes, like I said, it's just about timing. Also, but there's nothing wrong with coming back, circling back. If I'm responding, you say maybe just not now, but let's chat again. It's really because I know something might be coming up and that might be very relevant. But make the human connection always. I say, make the human connection, but know your story. And you know, tell me that story in about a minute. I want to talk to you about this, that. Is this something that might be of interest to your story? I will tell you yes or no right there. Or let me hear more. So if you get that opportunity, I say take it. If you see someone, hey, would you be interested? Don't know, like I said, you don't know if you don't try. But yeah, I would just go back. It's great to have a story, but know your story and how to sell it to someone else would be relevant.
Wow. Well, I think this is it. Thank you so much, Heidi, for the wealth of insight that you have provided us tonight. So everyone, that is it. I just want to make some last few minute announcement before we officially close out. So my Tell Your Story coaching intensive is still on. We're doing a 5-week coaching intensive around your story. And the whole idea is how to use your story for blueprint, for professional and business success, and to monetize your personal brand. Whether that be as an expert or whether that be as a change maker, how the story can be the very blueprint for that. It's like a masterclass, and it starts in January to February. And people come from this program and come out with launching their personal brand, concept for their books, starting a new business, 501c3, nonprofit, and people really positively overwhelmed with the wealth of resources already embedded in their story. And I think this also would be a very foundational step before pitching your media, because now you have a solid grasp of your story and you understand the distribution component as well as the monetization component. So that is still available. Secondly, as well, one of the stories, resources you can use for your pitch, not just for TV, for business and life in general. I highly recommend my book, Borderless Voice, The Power of Telling Your Story and Define Your Identity, with very practical insights that you can use to make your story more solid and increase the outcome while pitching your stories. Well, that is the announcement. And thank you once again, Heidi, for the wealth of information. And I'll be in touch with everyone very soon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.